How did this burger get here? Well, more specifically, how did the meat get here? The first well-recorded instance of a commercial slaughterhouse in the United States was established by William Pynchon in 1662. This slaughterhouse was in Springfield, Massachusetts, and was primarily for pigs. In the 1800s, the United States was in the process of transitioning from an agrarian society to a much more industrialized one. With that came changing sensibilities about where animals should be slaughtered. At this time, the populace felt that a publicly owned slaughterhouse for animals would be better regulated and more sanitary. They also wished to remove the slaughtering of animals from the eyes of the common person. By the end of the 1800s, most meat was sourced from municipally licensed slaughterhouses. These slaughterhouses were owned in cities, but were located outside the actual city borders. The animal slaughter industry was primarily located in Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Kansas City. But because of trade routes established during the Civil War, Chicago became the dominant meat-producing city. The Union Stockyard opened in Chicago in 1865. This massive slaughterhouse complex was on a whole new scale when compared to its predecessors, and it set the course for what would become the modern slaughterhouse. The Union Stockyard was the first slaughterhouse to utilize the conveyor belt, and because of that, the stockyard's production speed was dependent on the managers and not the workers. The use of the conveyor belt allowed the stockyard to become one of the first mass production businesses in the United States. The workers for the stockyard lived in terrible conditions. With low wages, many ended up in poverty, often living in densely populated and polluted slums next to the slaughterhouse. These conditions would lead to some of the first unionization efforts. As the population and the demand for meat increased, the conditions and methods of the industrial slaughterhouse worsened. And in the 1960s, the first modern slaughterhouses started to emerge. The modern slaughterhouse focuses on producing as much meat as possible, so they often cut ethical corners to meet profit quotas. This ideal of profit over ethics has led these corporations to treat cattle and other animals in absolutely horrendous ways. A prime example of the way these facilities abuse animals is the way they treat cattle. In many factory farms, animals never get the opportunity to live outdoors. The University of Minnesota suggests that cows can be kept in a 14 square foot pen. This is a model of my childhood bedroom, a space about 12 feet by 15 feet. The suggested pen size would mean cramming 13 cows in this space. Of course, this is not what their pens actually look like. This is what their pens would look like given the same amount of space. Because cows are crammed together, they must be dehorned so they don't accidentally hurt each other. This process is known to be extremely painful and can also lead to various infections. Along with being dehorned, this is painful, cows are branded, also painful, and castrated, once again painful. In order to maximize the amount of meat one cow produces, farmers tend to utilize selective breeding processes. This has led cows to having been bred to the point where they are more mass-men function. On top of this, cows are given a plethora of antibiotics to help them prevent diseases from spreading in the farm. Through both these processes, the cows that live in these slaughterhouses are so modified that they might as well be a whole new species. When cows are ready to be a harvested product, they are shipped to another facility. To transport cattle to these farms, cows are often crammed onto trucks. These trucks are typically poorly insulated, meaning that many cows die either from heat stroke or hypothermia. Cows are also often left without food or water whilst being transported. Once they arrive, they are kept in a holding pen, where they can often hear other animals being killed. When it is their turn, they walk down a narrow corridor before being stunned. Then they are hung onto a moving pulley system before finally they are killed by method of exsanguination.
Exsanguination
is to die by bleeding out. For these cows, that is after your throat's been slit. Cows often return to consciousness between the stunning and the slitting, meaning that for around 30 seconds, they are consciously bleeding from their throat. Of course, factory farming doesn't just abuse livestock. Humans are also treated very poorly by these industries. These institutions often employ disenfranchised people, such as immigrants and refugees, who have fewer means to seek legal recourse for poor working conditions. Workers, like the animals, are also crammed together, shoulder to shoulder, working with sharp objects and dangerous chemicals. Because of their vulnerable status, injuries often aren't reported. Still, the National Employment Law Project estimates that these workers are injured 50% more than other professions, with amputations being common. Especially in recent years, slaughterhouses and factory farming have seen a lot of pushback. Frequently, animal rights activists protest the cruel treatment at these facilities, and the poor working conditions have also begun to become a very well-reported issue. However, one of the largest criticisms factory farming faces is the environmental impact. Factory farms are responsible for 51% of greenhouse gas emissions from just their livestock, more if you consider the transportation costs. Factory farming also has a large impact on deforestation, with 1 to 2 acres of rainforest being cleared every second. This makes animal agriculture responsible for over 91% of the destruction of the Amazon, causing 110 species to be killed by the loss of their habitat. Land use doesn't just stop at deforestation. Livestock currently covers 45% of land in the world. 1/3 of the Earth's land has been desertified due to livestock use. That is not the only thing factory farming uses 1/3 of. Animal agriculture also uses 1/3 of the Earth's fresh water. 55% of water use in the United States is from animal agriculture. Just a single quarter-pound hamburger requires 660 gallons of water to produce. Can't even imagine what a hamburger this size would take. The meat industry has responded to a lot of these criticisms, often remarking that the only way to consistently produce meat to the level of demand is to utilize factory farming methods that have been described. But if we were to cut the production of meat, we would actually produce much more food. The food output of the meat industry is incredibly low compared to if plants were farmed instead. The same amount of land that cattle can be raised, 100 times the amount of food can be raised in plants. And that doesn't even take into account the food that is saved when it's not given to animals that are just going to be slaughtered anyway. It is clear that along with being cruel and harmful to the environment, that the meat industry isn't even that productive. Still, the demand and production of meat continues to grow, with no sign of slowing down anytime soon. Despite the numerous alternatives for meat products, our culture is still heavily reliant on the meat industry. In projects like these, I encourage those who view them to think critically about the food you consume and how it affects the world around you. And ask yourself seriously, what changes can you make to your diet to help change the world